This week's episode is with Nicholas Carr. It is a mind-blowing conversation. It really, I feel blown away after it. His book, one of his seminal pieces of work is his book, The Shallows, which has been translated into 25 different languages, and it was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. He's an international commentator and writer on technology and our relationships with technology. In 2010, his book, The Shallows, was released about the impact of the internet and how that was affecting his own ability to concentrate. This conversation that we had with him was incredibly sobering and also incredibly enlightening. It kind of really shows the impact of the internet on our ability as a society to create close connections, our ability to focus, our ability to contemplate. It's a fascinating conversation that's extremely sobering. And in it, there's the opportunity for change. Yeah, it certainly made me realize that my own relationship with technology is so habitual and there's so much inertia in it. And unless I kind of start to put a few boundaries on it, it's just that overwhelmed, incessant demand of modern technological life seems to be unstoppable. So it's a really enlightening conversation. If you feel you've got a challenging relationship with technology, with your phone, with social media, with how you work, this is very, very enlightening. It really, really is. So yeah, we really hope you enjoy this. Without further ado, we give you Nicholas Carr. I love your work, really do. And I think a question where I'd love to jump off with is the internet making us more superficial?
I think it is. And this goes against what we all assumed when we got access to the internet. And everybody thought, oh, more information, that has to be good. More connections, that'll, if we have access to more information, we'll be able to get smarter. It's this kind of assumption that information is a raw material and our brain is a kind of machine that turns that raw material into knowledge. But what I would argue is that, in fact, much the opposite has happened because we're so inundated with information. We spend our days kind of glancing at our various screens, and we end up being distracted and lose the ability to really concentrate on any one thing. And I would argue that to get smarter and more intelligent, you actually have to control your mind, think deeply about things rather than just process information as if you yourself were a high-speed computer.
And you need that space as well, that gap or that downtime to kind of almost create more neural pathways and for it actually to land and kind of seep in almost.
Yeah. I mean, one thing we know about, how we turn information into knowledge is that it's not just about grabbing some fact, like from Google or something. It's memorizing it, or what psychologists call consolidating memory, moving information from short-term memory to long-term memory. And it's through that process that you create connections and associations with between a new piece of information and everything else you know. And really, it's those connections and associations more than the bits of information floating around that are the essence, I would argue, of knowledge.
Mm. The title of your book, like The Shallows, was that intentional that you were talking about? Like, were you inferring that we were, it was making us become shallower?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I just kind of liked I liked the title because it was a bit mysterious, for a book about technology. But yeah, I wanted to get across. And as I say, when The Shallows came out, the first edition in 2010. And back then, people were still, even though I think a lot of people inside them had this sneaking suspicion that maybe this technology wasn't as good as it was being made out to be, but still it was, the very broad assumption was that, this is all to the good. More information is going to make us smarter.
Yeah, because nowadays it's hard. Like Dave was just saying there that I read one book last year and I had to work hard to read that physical book. I am finishing at least one book this year.
Was it a comic book?
No, it was an actual, and it was pretty small print. I was quite proud of myself.
Well, can you even tell us the name of the book?
Can't tell you the name, but I remember it. No, it was a novel, so I really enjoyed it.
But yet I've listened to 2 books this month. Like, it's April the 9th. I've listened to 2 books this month. So I found I've lost the capacity to read books, but I listen to a lot of books. And
which is better than nothing.
Yeah, it's better than
I don't
nothing.
know if it's yeah. But the main thing that inspired me to think about this and write about this was my own experience that, I used to be a really big reader. Then I started spending a lot of time. I was a technology writer, so I spent a lot of time online, loved the internet, loved computers. But I realized that when I'd sit down to read a book, I'd get, a paragraph or two in and I'd want to run to my computer and check email or something. It's almost like I felt I trained myself just to expect the constant stimulation, visual and intellectual or whatever, that you get when you're looking at a computer screen or a phone screen. And it's very, very hard once you've trained yourself to expect that to kind of calm your mind down enough to actually read a book.
Is it the dopamine? Is that the kind of thing that we're looking for? Because I know, I find and I'm sure most people listening can relate to this, is that if your phone is in the other room, there might be this anxiety. If your phone isn't on you, where's my phone? There's this constant, it's almost like this other companion. It's a shadow that's following you around. And I'm wondering, is this dopamine, is it that we're looking for, it fulfills some deep-seated insecurity or a need for dopamine, or what is your experience with that as a technologist? Or technology writer, really?
Yeah, well, dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter, a very important chemical in the brain, definitely plays a role, because dopamine is it's a chemical that gives us pleasure, and it's important because it's the way your brain learns to repeat doing certain things. And in many cases, that's very, very good for us. But one thing we know about human beings is that we're natural born seekers, which means we want, if there's information out there, we want to know about it. And if it's social information, something about a social, then we really want to know about it. And so when we carry our phones around all the time, we can always get new information. We know that there's always going to be new information just by glancing at the screen. And so dopamine kind of reinforces that desire to look at our phone. It's pleasurable. We actually love gathering information. The problem is that now that we have this with us all the time, there's no, as one of you said, there's no downtime anymore. There used to be a rhythm to your life. Sometimes you'd be gathering information and socializing and throwing conversation back and forth. And then other times you'd be by yourself. And you'd have to amuse yourself. You might read a book, you might listen to music, you might create a work of art. With the phone, we never have that kind of calmer moments when we're isolated from the flow of information. The information's always there, and our desire to grab it is reinforced by these brain chemicals, very powerful ones.
And what do you see the effect of that always-on mentality on us as humans?
I think there are a lot of effects. I mean, some of them are good. Having more connections with people, being able to get in touch with family who are far away easily, friends. We don't use this because it's horrible to us. We use it because we like it. But I think human beings are did not evolve to be constantly bombarded by information and messages. And I think many people, including myself, feel kind of overwhelmed by it all, in the need to keep up constantly and to constantly put ourselves on display through social media and everything. And I think that is one of the reasons, probably not the only reason, that we see that we've been seeing increases, at least here, certainly here in the United States, in anxiety, in feelings of depression, even in feelings of loneliness, which, when you think about it, seems kind of odd, since this is all about connecting with other people. And yet that tells us that all these connections are superficial connections. So I think not only does it sort of undermine our ability to think deeply, I think it places us under a constant emotional strain, because we're just not made for this kind of constant stimulation and constant socializing.
Yeah, I think everyone listening can empathize with that and probably goes, yeah, geez, it's so true. It's so true. And just because I know the earlier version of the Shallows book, it was pre-iPhone, it was pre-social media.
The iPhone
was
out
pre-AI, but it was pre-mass. Like, we didn't have computers in our pockets, so you were ahead of the curve.
Right.
And now you released an updated version in 2020, which had the afterword in it. And you got to kind of answer, to take it to kind of factor in social media and phones and how it's changing, and what, like, over that decade or longer than a decade between when you first wrote it and your kind of reflections 10 years later, what were you really emphasizing, and what were your observations over that 10-year window?
Well, a couple of things. One is that the phenomena that I talked about in the first edition of the book, and you're right. I mean, this was a time when people went online through their desktop and laptops. People were starting to get smartphones, but there weren't app stores. Most of social media were still websites rather than kind of constantly updated apps. And so, the basic phenomena I talked about, which is this state of being constantly distracted. We're so hungry for information, and it's so available that we're constantly distracted. That's become, and I think I have to say, I think this is pretty obvious, much, much worse with our iPhones, smartphones in general, in social media, because both of those are designed to keep us glued to the screen and distracted. The phone we carry with us all the time. It's constantly being updated. It's constantly send us notifications. And social media platforms are meticulously designed to know what piece of information to put in front of us at any one moment that'll grab our attention. So on one level, I think we've just seen kind of the progression of distraction and interruption that I talked about has accelerated. The other important aspect of this is there's been a lot more research now on the effects on our intelligence, on our emotional state, and so forth. And, as is often true with psychological experiments and neuroscientific experiments, there's not, you find some contradictory information when you look at the research. But if you look across it all, what you see is a pretty strong picture of how this technology keeps us constantly distracted. In fact, there have been some really interesting studies that I talk about in that afterward that really do show that if your phone is near you, even if it's turned off, and you try to do some task that requires a lot of concentration, you'll perform worse on the task because part of your mind is still thinking about your phone. We've really created this world in which either we're using our phone, or we're thinking about using our phone, or we're anticipating using our phone, or we're suppressing the desire to use our phone. And all of those things draw some of our attention away from whatever else we might be wanting to concentrate on.
So it's kind of like owning us in a sense. Like it's got a part. It's owning a percentage of our mental capacity, or our there's a pull, and I'm sure everyone can relate to this. This pull, quality. It's a bit like, Lord of the Rings. There's Gollum with his precious. There's an aspect of my, and there is, and I see it myself. Like every time I leave somewhere, is my phone there? Is my phone in the car? It's always there's an addiction to it. Like it's a very much addiction to it.
And if you can't find it, there's this sense of panic that overcomes you very, very quickly.
Yeah. Wow. I wonder.
And is this the case with you, as someone who really deeply understands this and has done long before it's became a cultural conversation?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I struggle very much with it. And when I wrote The Shallows, I still had a regular mobile cell phone, and I withstood the pressure to get a smartphone for quite a long time. But then ultimately, I finally gave into it, and yeah, I mean, it's a constant struggle, and I think this is just one example of the power of the whole this device and all the information services and companies behind it have over us, is that even when you understand that what this is doing to our brains and why our brains react the way they do, it's still hard to resist the pull.
Yeah, it really is. And I look back at, like, it's only literally been 10 to 15 years that we've had these massive computers in our pockets, aka a mobile phone. And you look at human history, it's been tens of thousands, and I don't know how many millions of generations of humans there's been. And you kind of wonder, here we are, 15 years. This is like the tiniest percent of a percent of human evolution. And you're kind of going, how could we, like, what is this doing to us into the future? Not even to what we're doing now,
We started one of Ireland's first juice bars back in about 2005 and literally have been juicing for over 30 years. It's one of the quickest way to rebuild your immune system and literally get the essence of any fruit and veg. It's something I do regularly to ensure that my kids are getting more fruit and veg and more high nutrient dense foods.
Yeah, we've partnered with a company called Nama Juicers. They make incredible quality juicers. They've innovated the standard juicer. It's an upright masticating juicer with a hopper. That means that you can juice hands-free. So you simply load the fruit and veg up the top and you don't have to, you just step away and it juices itself. It makes super high quality juice where the pulp literally comes out dry and it's easy to clean. They come with a 15-year warranty. They're offering you 10% off with the code HAPPYPAIR10. That's simply go to namawell.com, use the code HAPPYPAIR10 for 10% off at the checkout.
Wonderful juicer, couldn't recommend them more. We're all about nature, health, and living a natural way of life. Back about 8 years ago, a friend, Tony Riddle, suggested I have a pair of shoes, lads, that are going to transform your life. And it's like, go away, Tony.
They were a pair of Vivo barefoot shoes. They really were. They're amazing. They're minimalist, they're eco-friendly, and they're designed to let your feet move as freely as they would barefoot. It's about getting closer to nature with every step you take. They really are amazing shoes. They come in ranges for men's, women, for all aspects, kids.
They're a B Corp company, which means they're certified as being people working in a sustainable manner. Amazing people. We've hung out with them loads, and they really are at the forefront of health.
We believe in them so much that we've become ambassadors. It's all we've worn for the last 8 years. For running, for streetwear, for, you know, they're
even tuxedos. When I wear a tuxedo, I got a nice kind of formal pair. So they do offer a full range. Use the code HAPPYPAIR20 to get 20% off your next pair.
And even as soon as I've got a baby girl, Fia, she's 8 months old. And as soon as she starts walking, I will definitely make sure she starts with a pair of Vivo barefoot shoes because they have a wide toe box, a minimal sole, and they'll really help connect her with nature and her natural movement.
Research has shown that if you do wear a pair of Vivo barefoot shoes within a number of months, your foot strength will increase by 60%.
So yeah, so check them out, 20% off with the code HAPPYPAIR20 at checkout, vivobarefoot.com.
Most of human evolution took place when people were in fairly small groups and close to one another. You could only communicate with people you could actually see or converse with and stuff. And it's only been, since like 1850, when the telegraph was invented, that information started moving instantaneously. And I think we've been struggling with the consequences of that ever since then. But as soon as everything gets digitized, put online, and is in your pocket all the time, that's such a radical change and so different from, it creates a world that's so different and so alien from the world in which we evolved that it's really not a surprise that we struggle so much with the technology. And, as for the future, I wish I could be more optimistic than I am. But if you look at the various trends, whether it's in virtual reality or artificial intelligence, it's all about continuing to ratchet up the amount of time we spend in virtual worlds, exchanging information, looking at images and symbols, and just drawing us out of our physical surroundings.
And away from the natural world, which in essence, we forget that we're an intrinsic part of, which is crazy. With your finding of in your kind of afterword that you've written on The Shallow, was one of your finding to find that we function less intelligently than we did in previous generations before the internet? Was that one of the findings, that in essence our ability to function neurologically has declined?
Yes. I mean, I hesitate a little bit because intelligence takes a lot of different forms. And one of those forms is the ability to process information very quickly, collaborate with people, and perhaps, being connected the way we are on the internet, that may well train us to be better at that kind of, exchanging information type of intelligence. On the other hand, what I really focus on is what I would call deep thinking, when we're able to screen out distractions and be contemplative and be introspective and be reflective. And to me, those really, being able to do that, being able to control your attention and focus your attention, that's what really opens up the highest levels, I believe, of human intelligence. And I think that we're because you have to learn to do that. You have to learn to pay attention, and we're not experiencing it anymore or practicing it anymore, and kids aren't learning it anymore. I do think we're losing that kind of higher intelligence. And I think the research that's been done to date, and again, I think we're a long way from having all the research in, but certainly the research shows that the more distracted you are, the less able you are to grapple with complex, difficult problems. And if there's one thing that's very, very clear about our phones and the internet in general and social media, is it's extremely distracting. It's constantly interrupting us.
A weapon of mass distraction.
Yeah,
a friend often calls it.
Yeah.
And another thing that we've noticed, we've a cafe, and at one point we had 4 cafes, but we've noticed that the younger generations, in many of them, they're losing the ability to read social cues or even small talk. We've noticed that a number of them, just because they're being brought up on phones and so much of the communication is done via screens, that the subtle cues of face-to-face physical interaction and the ability to small talk with a stranger is declining.
And I think that's true. And again, I always have to put caveats in because I don't want.
Yeah, and this is a caveat because what
too
Steve
far
said is
beyond the research. But I've been working on a new book that looks more specifically at social media recently, and there's certainly now if you look at just young people's habits, they're radically different. At least in the United States, this is the data I'm drawing from earlier generations of young people. Young people today, when you ask them, would they rather hang out with their friends in person or communicate with their friends through media, through their phones or social media or whatever, 2/3 of them say they prefer mediated communication to being together in the real world. And when you think about that, that's kind of a radical change in human perception and human attitudes that teenagers who have always like to go out and gather together in groups and get away from their parents and get away from their home and stuff, not all the time, but a lot of the time, they just don't care that much about that. And I think that's very much the fact that they're so dependent on social media, video games, their phones, and it's just easier. It's not as socially risky because they don't have to worry about their gestures or their body language betraying them. They don't have to reply immediately to a question. They can think about it before they text and stuff. So, for all those reasons, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that if you're not gathering together with people in person, which is how we learn to empathize with other people, to read their emotions, which comes through much more from gestures and body language and your eyes and stuff than just from words. If you're not doing that all the time, if you're not practicing that, then you're going to be less adept at doing that as you grow up. And I do think we're seeing signs of that pretty clearly now.
It almost like it feels like it's pulling us into this analytical kind of, very kind of heady side of the human experience rather than, if you think for generations, for the history of humanity, we've been social creatures that interacted in a physical form. And now we're pulling back into a certain part of our brain, which to some people it's very natural. If you're a very analytical kind of programming type, that's, that part you're very natural with it. But certainly for us who grew up in the generations where there wasn't this, the internet started when we were 10 or 11 and we grew up lots without it. And it's just, I'm learning, I feel like as years go by, I'm spending more and more time in this analytical part of my brain, which it hadn't been kind of camped out in as much for the first, before the mass technological adoption.
And I think that's right in that you start to almost read other people as sets of symbols. They're posting here, they're using this emoji, they're supporting this cause and stuff. And I think once you start doing that, it changes human experience in really deep ways. And I think it's one of the reasons that we see a lot of political polarization you know, kind of tribal groups forming online and thinking anybody who thinks differently has to be a complete idiot. And because this is, you don't, if you're talking to somebody you disagree with in person, you're generally willing to listen to them and kind of, at least see what they want to say. And you don't, your instinct isn't to immediately think they're an idiot and to hate them. But when you're dealing with people as sets of symbols and sets of messages, it's very, very easy, or it's very, very hard to kind of actually listen to them and think of them as well-rounded human beings. They just become another set of memes or whatever flowing through your phone, flowing through your screen.
Yeah, I've seen that before, where we've got kind of some angry messages to our inbox, and when I replied with a personal message going, hey, thanks, we're doing our best, we're trying, we make mistakes, you immediately get this personal message. I'm so sorry, I didn't realize there was a real human there.
Yeah. It's there's one suggestion, and I think it's a good suggestion, but I don't think it's ever going to happen. But there's a school of thought now, and a lot of the people in front of it are legal scholars who say the big problem with social media is that it's removed all the friction from human communication. So if you're sitting with somebody, you kind of think before you say something, you think of their feelings. It's so fast now that we don't have to do that. And what they suggest is we need to reintroduce friction into social media. So, for instance, if you send a reply to something that somebody has posted, there's a 10-minute delay until that reply actually appears. And in that 10 minutes, you can think about it and you can go and revise it or delete it. And I do think it's a good idea because it would give us a buffer zone to say, hey, did I really want to say that? Was I being too extreme? And as I say, I think it's a good idea. I don't think it's ever going to come into practice.
I like the idea, but yeah. Totally.
So really, to summarize what we talked about so far, like our focus seems to be stolen. We seem to be more and more distracted. It's affecting how we socialize and integrate and spend time together. Like, it really is having a huge amount of, changes on our society and as we are as humans.
Our cognitive capacities.
Yeah,
decline.
so many different things. And I'm just wondering, like, about you personally, as someone who's spent a lot of time in this, like, how do you apply this, and how do you kind of being cognizant of all this, how do you apply this in your life, and what do you tell your loved ones around you or your family and friends? What advice do you kind of give them in terms of managing this? Because everyone listening, I'm sure, can empathize in terms of the pull and the distraction and the always on and the stolen focus. Every one of us can go, yeah, I get it. I'm totally with you on that.
Yeah. Well, I do. I wish I could tell you that I had figured it out and that I have a healthy relationship with technology, but I struggle with it like everyone does. But I think one of the things that comes clearly through the research is that one of the problems is that we've assumed from the start that we need to carry our phones on our person all the time. We can't get away from them. So you go on a walk or a hike or something, you have your phone. You go out to dinner, you have your phone. You have a conversation with a loved one, a family member, you have your phone nearby. You go to bed, your phone's on your bedside table. In that, just having the phone there and knowing it's constantly has new information, that's what leads us to, one of the things that leads us to kind of devote so much of our mind to the technology. So I think one thing I try to do, and I think this is a good idea, but it's quite hard, is to do things without your phone or a laptop or whatever near you. So if you want to go on a hike or just go for a walk somewhere, don't bring your phone. If you want to go out to dinner or lunch or something, don't take your phone. I mean, think more carefully. Do I really need this technology? Because it's going to get in the way of whatever else you're doing. It's going to interrupt you. It's going to distract you. It's going to grab part of your attention. So that's one thing. And there are other practical things like turning off notifications wherever you can on your phone. So what tech companies have discovered is that because we allow them to notify us, they more and more determine what we think about and what we pay attention to, because they're sending us these alerts and notifications. If you turn them off, then at least you can make the decision, oh, I'm going to look at TikTok now, or I'm going to look at Instagram now, or whatever, rather than the technology making those decisions for you. Beyond those kind of just practical things of kind of reducing the distractions that come from the technology, I think we're at a point where the expectation that everybody's always online has become built into society now. We all expect, that everybody is connected all the time. And so I think if we're going to take a different path, it has to be more than just individuals making certain decisions. As a society, we have to say, we have to put some controls on this. And particularly for instance, for young people, maybe we should ban phones from schools, at least in early grades and so forth. So to me, it's a personal challenge, certainly, but it's also at this point a societal challenge. And if we ignore either of those, then we're not really going to turn the tide.
100%.
Yeah, it's such an important topic. Like
it really is. And for anyone who's a parent listening, and myself as a parent of a young teenager and 2 younger children, how do you recommend or based on, your expertise in this field, how we introduce them to their own phones, technology, tablets? Is there any hygiene practice that you'd recommend to manage their neural development and their well-being ultimately?
I do think, excuse me, I do think that, allowing kids to interact with computers and technology for some amount of time is fine. And I think it can have benefits. But I think it's pretty clear that in the very early years, very young children up through the age of 5 or something, you want to keep them away from the technology as much as possible, because it's clear that once touch screens were introduced, so you didn't have to, have small motor control and stuff with a mouse and a keyboard, a 2-year-old can be an expert with an iPhone or an iPad or everything. And it's so intoxicating to them because they too love the kind of the stimuli, the visual stimuli and audio stimuli. So I think it's a very good practice to keep very young children away from the technology, and then to introduce it in a deliberate way, where, maybe they play some games, age-appropriate games, for some amount of time. I think that's fine. They learn to find information in some way, but I think it's important to regulate the amount of time they spend on it, and also, and this is equally important, to make sure they're engaged in other activities without technology where they can learn how to control their mind, where they can learn how to control their attention. Because human beings are not naturally attentive. We're naturally, our attention, as I said before, we're seekers. So we're constantly looking for new stuff. So you have to learn to pay attention. And kids learn to pay attention by, really applying themselves to reading books, say, or applying themselves to homework or to schoolwork without constantly looking at a tablet or a phone or whatever. So I think you have to, in addition to regulating their use of technology, you have to make sure they engage in activities, whatever they may be, through which they learn to pay attention, to be in control of their own mind, rather than letting their surroundings or their screens determine what they think about.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Like something which is coming up me as we're conversing here is kind of going, like, where are we headed? Because you reflect on it and you kind of go, here we are on the cusp over the last 2 decades. Technology has taken a much greater hold on our society at large. Like, it really has. It's kind of running us to an extent, and we've now got ChatGPT and AI out of the box as well. Right. And you're kind of going, like, if this continues on as it is in the current state of capitalism, where it's, everyone can do within the capital markets, you can do what you want if there's a market with supply and demand and whatever. You're wondering, at what stage do we need some interventions or some controls in place to mitigate some of these negative aspects, because it is like I'm during this conversation I'm going, geez, my relationship with tech is like, it's addictive, it's, you know, blah blah blah, and most people listening can do the same, and you're going like, where do you see it headed, and do you see that at some stage we're going to need some interventions which are, you know, governmental or political or whatnot?
State.
Yeah. And as you can just see, the sun has come out, and I'm kidding.
Yeah, you're moving around the room. You look like you're kind of shining. It's like, wow, look at this.
It's hot. Nothing spiritual, just the sun coming through the window. Yeah, I mean, I think we've been I think we haven't done a good job of thinking about how to place controls on the technology, whether it's government regulations or whether it's parental controls or whatever. And some of that is because from the start, we've had this kind of idealistic view of the internet and computer technology. We've thought that, oh yeah, more information has got to be good, so let's not control it. More communication has got to be good, so let's not control it. So particularly in the United States, I mean, I think Europe has been more aggressive at imposing at least some controls and regulations on tech companies. The US less so. But I do think that, you know, unfortunately, because we don't have a history of applying those kind of controls, we've allowed the technology to become deeply entwined with our moment-by-moment lives, with all sorts of social processes. You can't do anything anymore unless you do it through a computer. And so at that point, it gets harder and harder to change course. But I do think, for instance, with the arrival of, you know, ChatGPT and the other generative AIs, as they're called, you know, this is very early stage of what we don't really know is what's going to happen. But it seems pretty clear that this is a very important moment in the history of technology, maybe in the history of humanity, where suddenly, instead of just bringing us information or leading us to information, the machines themselves begin talking to us, generating the information themselves. And it does seem to me that, you know, as a society, I don't know what the best route would be, but it seems to me as a society, we need to think about this in a way that we did not think about the internet or social media in the early stages. So I think it would be very wise to, instead of erring on the side of laissez-faire, let the tech do whatever it wants, let the companies do whatever they want, I think we should be more aggressive in controlling things. And then if we're too aggressive, you can always back away. And I hope we're able to do that, whether we are or not. I don't, and some of this is being in the US where it's become extremely hard to put any kind of regulations on tech companies, even though both political parties seem to think they're needed. So I'm not optimistic about our ability, at least at a governmental level, of imposing more controls.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Yeah, you look cool with the light coming halfway across your face. You look very cool. I tend to.
I'm not going to be able to escape it, so sorry.
I tend to hold a similar fear in that, you know, I think controlling in the economic model of capitalism, it's hard for government to put control on these entities that are in some cases larger than some governments in terms of GDP. In terms of just their ability to generate revenue is just vast. So yeah, I'd similarly tell.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think we individuals are also complicit in this, because even though we complain, even though we know that there are problems here and we feel it in our own lives, we still want the technology. We really do. And so on the one hand, you can say, oh, the companies are manipulating us by giving us information that grabs our attention. But then you also have to ask yourself, well, if it's grabbing our attention, it must be something that interests us. So aren't we also complicit? Aren't they feeding us what we actually desire? And again, I don't think we might have been, I think we're sometimes too quick to say, oh, it's the algorithm. Oh, it's Facebook or Meta or Apple or Google or whatever. And we don't look into our own human nature and see why we're so attracted to this. And that, again, I think that's another missing piece.
Oh yeah, the room for the space, the deeper thought. which is so lacking in modern day society. One question that comes straight up with me, Nicholas, is that in many of the schools, at least in some of the schools here in Ireland, they've introduced a lot of the education medium is done through an iPad or done through some form of tablet.
Yeah.
And even I've noticed myself, when I write with a pen for even 10 minutes, I notice my hand starts cramping because it's not used to it. Reading on a screen versus reading on paper, what's the impact on that in terms of our ability to take in the information and our ability to actually think deeper with it?
Yeah. Well, one thing that we tend to think that if you give us the same words in any format, on paper or on screen or, carved into a stone or something, we'll read them the same way. And that's clearly not true. One thing we know is that, and we don't appreciate this is that reading is a tactile experience. It involves our hands and our touch, as well as purely a visual skill. And so if you've ever, often if you read a book, for instance, and you get really into it, and then you put it up on your shelf, and then you say, 2 years later, you say, oh, there was this really interesting passage there that I want to look at. It's often actually easy to find it because there's something in our memory, something about our memory that is very tactile. So you can flip to the right place, even if you don't know how it's there. So I do think, and again, I think there's quite a bit of research on this, that when you read in print, you have better memory, better retention than when you read on screen. And some of that is simply, as I say, because of the tactile nature of reading in print. But the other difference is that usually when you're reading on a screen, there's all sorts of other things going on the screen. You can check email, you can check messages coming in, you can, Google stuff and stuff. Whereas the good thing about a book, and we sometimes think this is a drawback, but it's a good thing, is that there's nothing else going on. There's no streams of information. You can't check your email while you're reading a book. It's just the words on the page. And so that if you think of a book as a tool for reading, it's actually a very good tool because it literally and figuratively screens out distractions. You're just focused on the words. So while I certainly don't want to suggest that, reading on screen is some horrible thing, it's pretty clear that if you want to maximize your retention, maximize the way you think about what you're reading, and maximize your enjoyment, it's better to read on paper than on a computer.
Yeah. I read something where it said that the more links, typically there's less comprehension. And this comes back to the distraction and that idea that, your phone is always pulling on you in the same way the links, you're kind of going, oh my God, would that take me somewhere better? Would that, there's always this,
right.
This kind of, your brain is split to a certain degree.
Right. We don't think about it, but each link is itself a little distraction because, as you said, you hit it and somewhere in your mind, you have to say, should I click on it or shouldn't I?
Yeah.
So even, this is another example. When hypertext first appeared, everybody was real excited. Oh, we'll be able to click and go somewhere else and learn some more context. Actually, what essentially has happened is that it's gotten in the way of reading comprehension.
Wow. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'd love to go back because we've covered that, it's really challenging. We've covered so many different things, but one thing I'd love to go back to and just go a little bit deeper in is the importance of reflection and contemplation. As you said, these are some of the greater aspects of human, cognitive capacity, and it's some of the greater places of creativity. And most people who create wonderful works, they'll typically go deep, and that you need space, you need time you can't be stressed and in this always productive, always on kind of space. And I wondered if you could just talk about the importance of that and why it's so vital, and in this world which seems to be eroding that space, why we've got to really defend these times to reflect and contemplate.
A lot of it comes down to a topic that gets talked about a lot these days, which is attention. And really, when we talk about contemplation, introspection, reflection, these are all manifestations of a person who is able to control his or her own thoughts, rather than let the environment determine what they think about. So when we talk about these forms of thinking, we're really talking about controlling your own mind and choosing what you're thinking about. And I think that ability unlocks all sorts of opportunities for people. Some of them are intellectual, certainly, being able to concentrate, being able to control your mind means you're gonna have greater knowledge ultimately. You're going to be able to think more deeply about things. You're going to be able to put things into context, a broader context. But it also, having that skill is also important if you want to, create a work of art in any form, from literature to painting or whatever, because that also requires this ability to think deeply, to control your own thoughts. If you want to appreciate art as a viewer, as a listener, or anything, that also requires it. If you want to have a good conversation with someone, that also requires the ability to focus and not be distracted. So I think if we cut ourselves off from the contemplative side of our intelligence, we cut ourselves off from a lot of the most interesting and most enjoyable things we human beings. So it goes beyond, just being better at problem solving or doing a test in school. It goes to things that I think are really central to the experience of being a person in the world.
And the irony is that kind of how we're living and how modern life is, it's just corroding the space for that. Like, you need to have, such high walls and such protected spaces to create this time for contemplation and reflection, where messages and email and people and just the demands, the efficient machine of modern life seems to chew up these, this kind of space.
And so many of these devices that we're using, they're theoretically time-saving devices. But what do we do with our time? We distract ourselves more.
Right.
Yeah, you said
there was a funny story of someone who was taking a monk off to do a meditation, and they were in New York, and they were going to walk to the event, and the person taking the monk said, "Here, we'll take the train. It'll save us time." And they took the train, and the monk asked the guy, "How much did we save?" And your man said 10 minutes. He said, "Great." And he went off, and he kind of walked ahead, and your man was like, "Where are you going?" And he found the monk sitting in the park, and he said, "What are you doing?" "Well, I saved 10 minutes. I'm spending it in the park." But we don't, as humans in our modern society, all this time that we save, we just distract it. I guess that's the irony of that one. One place. Oh, you were going to talk there. Sorry, Nicholas, I cut you off.
No. I was just going to agree that one of the long-standing stories about computers and digital technology is that everybody expected them, in work or whatever, to be time savers, to increase productivity. And yet, as you say, the time they free up, we devote to things like, TikTok or playing games on our phones, or, in a business setting, on the one hand, you think, oh, PowerPoint is, now I can put together these presentations on my computer, so it's going to free up a much time. But people spend all their time like switching between fonts and just wasting huge amounts of time. So there's this paradox of the computer as this time saver and time waster that's always been in conflict.
In duality. For the remainder, I'd love to talk to you about social media, mental health, and loneliness. The advent of the internet, it was this ability to connect like never before. It was to turn the world into a global village. Yet we're living in an epidemic of loneliness. I wonder if we could talk about social media, loneliness, and connection.
Yeah, and again, this is kind of analogous to what I talked about with cognition and intellect, that we think that more information is going to make us smarter, but in fact our minds our minds are not good at processing tons of information coming to us very, very quickly. And so what we thought would make us smarter actually makes us more shallow. And I think something similar has happened with communication, interpersonal communication. We thought, oh, social media and email and texting and all of this would, by allowing us to have more connections more quickly with more people, share more information, share more thoughts, this would have to have very good effects on, social harmony, on our own feelings of self-worth. We'll be able to express ourselves more. But again, we run into this limitation on our ability to deal with all of this. So if you're constantly communicating, constantly taking in and sending out messages, constantly shifting your focus from one person to another person, thinking about posts online, it overwhelms us and it emotionally drains us. We're just not made to do so. Instead of leading to better understanding, social harmony, it often has exactly the opposite effect. And I think that's true also when we look at loneliness. It turned out that, interacting with a person as a symbol on a screen is very, 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 and much less satisfying than doing that person in person. And more than that, even when we are together with other people physically in person, because everyone has their phones, their attention is divided between the people that are around them and what's going on on their phone. So even when we gather together, if the technology is around, we're having more superficial relationships. We're not engaging as deeply with other people. And I think it's because of this sense of too many shallow interactions, too many shallow relationships, that ultimately people feel lonely and anxious, and even in the worst cases, kind of, depressed. And it just goes to show that, social relationships do not transfer from the physical world into the virtual world without being changed in deep ways. And unfortunately, I think what one thing that changes is that we simply don't feel as closely connected to the people we're interacting with.
Yeah, scary. Really, the whole thing, when I go deep on this topic, it makes me feel frightened. Like, it genuinely does, and makes me kind of go, oh my goodness. Like, and then the irony is I'll finish this conversation and I'll look at my phone, or I'll go look at something on my computer, and those are the habits. Those are the kind of, oh, quick, I better get back on this treadmill and keep this machine going because I need to be faux productive and doing 4 things at the same time. Maybe just the final topic, which I'd love to talk to you about, is, and this is another kind of symptom of technology, and it's an effect of technology, is the idea that we can multitask. And the average knowledge worker, a person working nowadays, whether they're a freelancer or someone working for a company, most people are working on computers, and there's these efficient means of communication such as Slack and email and all these channels which are meant to be more efficient with it. But there tends to be so many things coming in that the multitasking is exactly as you're saying, or like what are the effects of multitasking and how we work it?
Yeah. So really, multitasking is kind of a myth. We're incapable of doing 2 at once. When people say they're multitasking, what they're really doing is what psychologists would call task switching. They're focusing on one thing, and then they're shifting their focus to another, and they're going back and forth. And when that happens, what we know from the neuroscience is that a whole lot of your mental energy gets siphoned off into the process of just switching. If you're focused on one thing and then you focus on another, your brain has to kind of empty its working memory, its short-term store of information that you're working with, in order to reorient itself to this new task, which requires new information. And so when people say, oh, I'm really good at multitasking, what they mean is I'm really good at task shifting. But what they mean further than that is I'm actually I'm actually thinking in more superficial ways. Because if you're not focused on one thing, if you're constantly shifting, you're burning a lot of that mental energy just in what are called switching costs, the mental costs of doing that. So I think particularly young people, because they're able to, text with somebody while they're doing their homework and they're listening to music and, maybe once in a while they're glancing at YouTube or TikTok. They think, oh, I'm good at multitasking. What they don't realize is that each of the things they're doing, they're performing much more poorly than they would if they actually just focused. So really this whole sense that, we're going to learn how to multitask goes against what we know about the brain's limitations in being able to pay attention to two things at once. We just can't do that.
It seems like part of the solution to what we're talking about is we need to cultivate the capacity to focus, which in one sense, one daily habit is meditation or mindfulness or one of these type of practices which help cultivate us being here and now and being able to focus and go deep on something rather than the shallows of being shallow across multiple things. And I guess that's the challenge of the age with which we live in.
Yeah. And I think, I think some of the popularity of things like meditation and yoga these days is in a way a reaction to the overload of information and communication. I think people have a real sense that there's something missing. And so they look to meditation or yoga or whatever, things that require kind of high degrees of contemplativeness as a way to kind of escape the digital world we've created for ourselves. And I think I think those are good things. But maybe we should listen more carefully to that voice within us that says, this is just too much, and apply that more, not just to when we're meditating or doing these particular tasks, but try to incorporate more into our moment by moment, day-to-day lives in general.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, closing remarks. Imagine that you're talking to a grandchild, which you had. Just this is theoretical now, and you're embarking some piece of wisdom from all your experiences as a commentator on technology for decades, with decades of experience. What would you say about how to best manage their relationship with technology, and what kind of piece of advice would you want to impart on them?
I would first try to impress on them that the stuff that's coming through their screens is less important to their lives than they believe it is. We tend to get into this cycle of just believing we have to know everything that's happened, every message that's come through immediately. I would try to say that actually we don't need to know all that. Most of this stuff is not stuff that needs to grab our attention immediately. So you should try to go through life making your own decisions about what's important for you to be doing or thinking about at any given moment, rather than let the technology make that decision for you. And I think inevitably what that means in practice is we need to go back and think about computers, or you need to go back and think about computers the way we did many years ago when we thought of them as tools. You use them sometimes when you wanted to do something that a computer could do, and then you went away from them and did other things without them. And if you can prevent yourself from getting into the habit of thinking of your phone or your laptop or your desktop or whatever comes next as kind of an extension of your being that needs to be with you all the time, and you can make more careful choices about what is this tool good for and what is it going to get in the way of, then I think you'll have a healthier relationship with the technology. You don't have to get rid of it altogether, but you have to realize that it should be a small part of your life, not a very, very, very large part of your life.
Wow. This has been incredibly enlightening. It really has.
And very sobering.
Like very sobering.
It kind of really it shows the shadow which so many of us sense, but often
there's so much inertia. There's just so much inertia and so much habits that make us kind of there isn't that contemplative, reflective space to actually go, oh, I'm a pawn within this machine and I'm the frog that's being slowly boiled alive, but I don't notice because I'm too busy.
I don't want to notice.
Yeah, I don't want to notice. It's a jacuzzi for now. It's still a jacuzzi and there's bubbles and there's a lovely lavender smell within it. But at some point, maybe, you know, it will corrode our humanity.
Right.
Yeah. This is really enlightening.
It's a strange time because we're trying to adapt to these things that don't suit us very well, but which we're sort of addicted to. And creates a lot of tension, social tensions, also a lot of personal tensions.
Yeah, I see I've got a 7-month-old baby and she realizes already that, you know, phones, like she just sees that they're very important. Everyone that she sees, she knows is important and she's straight away trying to get it and eat it and hold it. And this is really important. She knows it's like, it's a really important tool, and it's amazing to see it this young that it's just, there's that awareness.
Yeah. It's really, the smartphone is really unlike any other technology we've ever come across before, because it just incorporates so much stuff that is interesting to us, that you can see that we've created this machine that is very good at controlling our minds.
Yeah. There's that aspect of feeling like a pawn rather than feeling like a responsible, autonomous human.
Right.
Yeah. Amazing. This has been wonderful, Nicholas. And
your book, The Shallows, has been re-released. I think it was back a few years ago. 2020 it was re-released.
2020, yeah, with an afterword that kind of talks about social media and the smartphone.
And you're working on a new book now on social media.
You've got a great account on social media, don't you? People can follow you on social media.
I'm not very active on social media. I have a Twitter or X account. I have a blog that I've had for many, many years called roughtype.com. But it's been, as I've been working on this new book, I put it on hiatus. So I haven't been active there either. So I'm kind of a ghost on, spent a lot of time on computers, but I'm kind of a ghost online at the moment.
Yeah.
You do have a website, nicholascarr.com,
which is good. No, your blog is very good. I did read some articles. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks a million. This has been enlightening. I think everyone who's made it this far in the conversation has plenty of food for thought and reflection.
Well, good.
For
good.
Room for
I very much enjoyed it. Yeah,
if they can create the space for it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time. We appreciate it so much. And I really look forward to when your new book comes out. We'd love to have you on because it's such a valuable topic.
Yeah.
When do you foresee that it'll come out?
I think it's going to be early next year, January or February next year.
Wonderful. Well, we'd love to have you on when that comes out.
Thanks. I'll definitely take you up on that.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks million, Nicholas.
Okay.
All the best. Have a lovely day.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
While we have you, once a week we write a newsletter. It's called Happier. It's got simple, tried and tested practices to make your life better.
We include recipes and practices that you can apply on a daily basis to make your life happier.
We've had lots of people say before that it's really helped make their life better. So you can sign up on the happypear.ie, our weekly newsletter called Happier.